The question really is this deal good for Israel? You know, we feel the pain, as you heard. I mean, I get chills thinking of these people, alive or dead, coming back into our country. We've been waiting for so long. But what happens after?
Exactly, and this is the question, what's the follow-up? And I think we're walking a very thin line here. Eventually, we all want to see the hostages coming back home. The only question is, you know, the goal of the deal really here is when the benefit trumps the cost, and for sealing a deal for minimum cost for Israel, for minimum concessions on the part of Israel, with maximum concessions on the part of Hamas. And that could only be done with the benefit of military pressure. However, we saw that not all leverages were taken advantage of over the past year. We saw how Iran basically was non-existent international pressure on Iran, who's the main sponsor of Hamas, its protege, propped it up to launch the October 7 attacks. The heads of Hamas in Doha are calling the shots, basically sitting in five-star hotels, and the pressure is not on them, but Hamas in Gaza. And finally, the humanitarian aid, which Secretary Blinken just bragged last week, that the United States managed to pound on the table and convince Israel to flow in humanitarian aid at all costs. That brings Israel to a very weak position to begin with in negotiations. Hamas knows that there is light in the tunnels, and humanitarian aid could
But I think the question is, you know, we signed the deal, we get, let's say, you know, 3, then 30, then whatever hostage is home, God willing, right? But ultimately, we're also going to be making concessions, as you said.
Let me just say that the end game of this war must be that Hamas is eliminated and the threat from the Gaza Strip is removed, and that can only be achieved with a permanent military presence of Israel in the Gaza Strip until such time the Palestinians concede their armed struggle against Israel. All of this while bringing the hostages home. They're, retained as bargaining chips in Hamas's very cruel and cynical game, and that must be a stage on the way to obtaining that end game.
Do you think that the U.S. might actually lead a strike against Iran once Trump takes office, or is he more likely to just provide us, let's call it the bunker busters, and tell us, okay, go out and do the dirty work?
Well, I think we're nearing a point of no return, really, and that's Trump's golden opportunity on day one to decide what direction does he want to lead the Middle East, and that's really the moment to regain American leadership in the region. I think that the choice that we attempted to avoid all these years can no longer be procrastinated. And I think the only way to remove the Iranian gun off the table is by leading a limited, preemptive, and military action against Iran's nuclear program.
By U.S. or by Israel?
So a combination of the United States and Israel. We know that the U.S. has B-2 stealth bombers, which Israel does not have. We just recently used them in Yemen, the United States, And that sends a very strong message to the Arab world as well. If Trump wants to do all these great things, peace between Israel and the Arab world, Iran is standing in the way of all these policy items. And I think once we remove just the nuclear program, no boots on the ground, I think we can see finally peace and prosperity in the Middle East.
Or can we actually remove the nuclear program? My understanding is that the nuclear program is in multiple locations, that some of it is very, very deep underground. I know some of these weapons are actually able to do that, but also that it's centered around centrifuges, which apparently can be created anywhere. So are we able to actually destroy Iran's nuclear program?
Yes, the United States and Israel have the military capacity of technically doing that, but I think we were hamstringed by something much larger up until now, which is, we know that once we strike Iran, we invite a whole host of, missiles coming from Hamas, Hezbollah, Houthis, and Iran itself, raining down on Israeli cities. And now look, Iran is much more vulnerable than it's ready to admit. All of its frontal defense is basically decimated. And we know, reportedly, Israel struck some of its air defense as recently as October. And so we don't get any more favorable conditions than that to remove the Iranian gun off the table. And Arab countries themselves want this to happen as well. They've been kind of wary of warming up relations with Israel and the United States, boosting their oil supply and warming up relations with Israel because of the Iranian threat. And so if we remove that, I think we can usher in also sending a strong message to China, Russia, even the rogue regime in Venezuela, where Iran is leading drug trafficking and mass migration.
Well, that's very interesting that you bring that up, because Russia and Ukraine, and do you think that there's even an opportunity for some kind of peace with the Palestinians as Trump takes office? We had the deal the century before. It's not clear, by the way, that Trump doesn't envision either a two-state solution or some kind of autonomy for the Palestinians. What's your take?
Well, I think in American foreign policy studies, let's say, they say peace is the goal and peace through strength. Mm-hmm. And so if you want to achieve peace, you got to obtain strength as well. I think Iran is the key here. Once you remove the Iranian nuclear program off the table, you bring home Arab countries, you checkmate Iran, as I said. And so you create a much broader regional alliance. So it's now time for all hands on deck. And I think Arab countries, if the delta between the parties used to be, how you treat the Palestinians, right now Arab countries are much more interested in how they secure their own regimes. And Israel has much more leeway to, exert sovereignty over strategic depth in Judea and Samaria. I agree, the Jordan Valley, Area C, all these places are strategic to Israel's very existence. We cannot exist in what Eva Evan called the Auschwitz borders. So absolutely, this is Israel's eastern border. We defend ourselves against all threats coming from, any truck could drive from Tehran to Tel Aviv. I think in that reality, Israel can really take advantage of its renewed strength and demand much more negotiations.
And I guess my last question, I want each of you to take a minute to be able to answer it, is actually centered around Trump's relationship with Netanyahu and his unpredictability. We've talked here about so many issues of which we have this vision for what it will look like when Trump comes into office here in Israel, where 70% of the population supported Trump, by polls, not that they can vote, but they were really felt that Trump would be best for Israel. Do you think his relationship with Netanyahu will be a good relationship? And are we at all concerned about his unpredictability? If everybody can take 30 seconds to a minute to answer, or you start.
I get the benefit of the start. Yeah, I think unpredictability is an advantage at some point. I think Trump comes from a very clear moral compass as well, not just his political views, but also his belief that you should prevent nuclear proliferation when he talks about even in Russia and China, not just Iran and North Korea. When he talks about Israel, he really goes back home to who's good and who's bad, who's fighting against the forces of evil, really going back to the Reagan doctrine. I think we're going to have very fruitful 4 years, if so we choose. Just need to take advantage of what's best for America and how we can really work together to make good on our interests.